This podcast is brought to you in partnership with Eva International Media Ltd. Hello and welcome to Down to Earth with Terry Virch, where we talk about what matters on planet Earth. If you love the podcast, please subscribe and give us a rating. Today, I've got a super special guest on, Melani Robinson. Melani's a writer for the New York Times, Huffington Post, among others, and she's currently working on a memoir about her experience in Russia. She's also created several scripted television series, and her website is www.melanirobinson.com, Melani with an I. So Melani, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Terry.
I was reading the Times. It's been a few weeks now, and you wrote an amazingly touching article. It was cool. It brought back a lot of memories for me about Russia, because I've obviously spent a lot of years there, but in a very, very different way. My time in Russia was I'd go to Moscow for a few weeks here and there. Can you tell us your story a little bit? Because your story is very different than mine.
Right. And you saw that article in the New York Times Modern Love column. And so it was basically a love story. Mm-hmm. My husband was offered a position in Russia as president and COO of a large company. And he was asked to bring an American retail model to this large company in Russia. So we had just gotten married, and it certainly was not where I planned to enjoy my first year of marriage with my husband. But, he said, let's do it. It's historic. And it was a 5-year commitment. And so that's what we did. We ended up, and it wasn't, it was tough. It was a very, very tough thing to experience. Because we weren't in a place that would have been easier to adjust to, such as Moscow or St. Petersburg, mm-hmm. which has a large expat community and all kinds of activities that are set up, social activities and things like that are set up for, and people speak English.
Right.
In Moscow and St. Petersburg. We moved to Rostov-on-Don, which was really it's southern Russia. Mm-hmm. And it was a village of 1 million, and we were the only Americans, and very, very few people spoke English. And
a village of 1 million. What do you mean by that? That's a perfect way to put it, I think.
Right. It had the numbers to be considered a city, but it had the kind of backward sort of feel of a village. It was a lot of people who were who had lived there their whole lives and really hadn't experienced anything else beyond that. They all kind of knew each other. And yes, the population was 1 million, but it still had, at that point, and I know it's changed since then, that was 15 years ago, but at that point it had very little to offer beyond the basics. And even those basics were rough, such as water was turned off constantly. And I don't know if this has changed, but at that time, all the hot water was heated in a facility and then pumped through the streets to homes. So you never had hot water. Sometimes you had no water.
Right.
Roads were horrible. It was pretty crazy.
In Moscow, they still do this, where like on October, excuse this cough. It's not COVID. It's this chronic cough that I have. They turn the hot water on in October, and then all of a sudden everybody's got steaming hot water or whatever. And then in the summertime, they turn the hot water off. So you're taking cold showers and cold baths, and they still do that. And it's the 21st century. Yeah.
It's so crazy. And the water was never hot. So we had a small water heater in our bathroom that heated the shower, but it would only heat one. So if you wanted to take a shower, you had to kind of space it out. So, or take a bath together
together. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I know Moscow sounds better, but there's a lot of people that still have that, trial even today. And, I had a chance in the Air Force to live in Korea, in Germany, spent a lot of time in Turkey because of Iraq. Of course, I spent a lot of time in Russia. So I've been around the world and actually lived, but it was always on an Air Force base, which is, I
Very
think,
different.
very different than your experience. Because we were around Americans all the time,
Right.
and you were
And
not.
for example, I spent a year in Saudi Arabia in my first husband, my daughter's father, worked for an engineering company. So
Right.
I lived in Dhahran for a year.
Oh, wow.
But we lived in a compound. And so it had, now obviously, when you leave a compound, then all the rules apply. I couldn't drive and I needed to cover your head. Yeah. Right. But it was a much more hospitable place for someone from the West to be than Russia. Russia was, we were living in a building with, and everything that was normal there was not normal to someone who came from a more Western sort of
West.
Mm-hmm.
That's incredible. So, by the way, I have a great picture of Rostov-on-Don from space. It's the Don River is huge. It shows up really well. It makes this big, like 90-degree turn, and it's right by Ukraine, which I want to talk about. But you were in a European country in Europe, and you said that Saudi was more hospitable. And I've been to Saudi. I have great Saudi friends. Love the people and the food, but wow, it could not be more different than the West. It is it's like an alien planet. And you said that was better than Russia. That's amazing.
Well, it was easier. It was an easier adjustment. And also the thing about Russia is that when you're in Saudi Arabia and you leave your home and you're you're walking around, you know that you don't live in that this is not where you're from.
You're not from these parts, right?
That's right. You're covering. I was covering. I couldn't drive. So I knew where I stood. It was very clear. Russia was not so clear. There was a lot of gray area in Russia. And sometimes you would get comfortable because you would be walking around and everyone kind of, we were wearing the same clothes. We were doing the same sort of things. Mm-hmm. And so you would get a false sense of security in Russia that you fit in. We did not fit in.
Mm-hmm. How's your Russian?
Oh, terrible. I'm so horrible with languages. I can't even tell you. I took 3 years of Spanish. I have a lot of friends who speak Spanish around me. I can't speak Spanish. Forget about Russian. It's awful. I knew a few words.
If you can't do Spanish, Russian's going to be pretty. That is not an easy language.
Oh no. I learned the important words like svinya, which I start the essay with that, where I was yelling at people who were men.
Swine, right?
Yeah, they were drinking beer that was sold in carts, and then they'd come over, and the building right next to us, they would then relieve themselves on the side of the building. So I'm standing on my balcony with nothing to do, bored out of my mind, and watching these guys pee on this building, and I'm yelling svinya and swine.
You're calling them pigs, yeah,
disgusting,
right.
And it's hilarious because that building, it's no longer the same building. It's been torn down. It was a mess. But that building was the FSB kind of retirement building where they would go, benefits building, where former KGB or FSB.
Pensionary, the retirees.
Right. For the pensioners, the old spies,
Can you imagine being like, someday I'll live in an old folks home. Can you imagine living in an old folks home with... like they're all spying on each other or something? That would be a pretty funny your Christmas party.
That would be hilarious. Yeah. These old spies all, and it's interesting because the company that my husband and then eventually I worked for, the head of security was former KGB or FSB.
Right.
And let me just tell you, things got done with that guy. He was old. But things were done. Shipments that came in for our personal belongings and things like that would have been held up forever in red tape were immediately delivered to our apartment. Visas or all of that. They were handled immediately. But it's interesting because he ended up being there for whatever reason, perhaps gathering with his old spy friends, and had a massive heart attack and died there. I mean, I'm not laughing at that, but it's just ironic that. And then part of me thinks maybe he didn't have a heart attack when he.
You never know.
That's it. Maybe he crossed one of those old spies.
You know, in Russia, it's been really dangerous to be a doctor they started losing their balance. They kept on falling off of buildings. It's been dangerous to be a journalist.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Putin has killed a lot of journalists during his time.
Oh yeah.
In power. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that story is kind of funny because I want to hear about your gaming industry background, but
good.
You know, people in Vegas, you know, they get shit done, right? I was when in the Air Force, I did this event in not Sardinia, Corsica, the French island, and it's where Napoleon is from. Flew an F-16 there, and I was staying at this hotel, and it was like being in The Godfather. And at the time, they were having these problems with all these local Corsican. It's a mob, Italians, you know. That exists. And I said, hey, are there going to be problems with, you know, these terrorists out there and with our F-16 here? And he said, no, there's not going to be any problems. And I said, well, how do you know there's not going to be any problems? And he was like, there's not going to be any problems. And the light bulb went off. Okay.
Right.
There's not going to be any problems.
Right.
So in Russia, what you just described in one sentence, the entire country, and really why we're having this disaster with Russia today, and that the FSB guy got your stuff delivered. You know, he got shit done right there. It's just corruption. It's just kleptocracy. It's the most basic form of Godfather mob boss getting stuff done. And that is cultural rot, right? It just completely undermines the whole country. And every Russian knows that's how you get things done.
Absolutely.
Every Russian, they don't necessarily like it. They don't want it to be that. That's why they come to the West and they love being in America and stuff, because we have our problems, of course, but it's not that widespread, I don't think.
Right. Well, and the word bribe is used. It was very interesting to me. And you're right. I'm originally from Las Vegas. I was born and raised in Las Vegas. And certainly when I was a child growing up, the mob still controlled that industry. I mean, that's completely changed now. Mm-hmm. But it was not. I used to babysit for a guy that we were 100% certain was connected.
Right.
And parents, friends of mine whose parents were in that industry, who were, not to generalize, but Italian and probably very connected. So it was not anything. My parents were public educators. So my parents were school teachers and school principals. So that wasn't the environment that my parents weren't in that industry.
Right.
But being from Las Vegas, there isn't a person.
It's there. Yeah.
That's right. It was there. So, so when I went to Russia with my husband, I had just left my position. I was running training and development in a big hotel casino in Las Vegas. And we got married, and then I, relocated, and then surprise, here we are going to Russia. And so when I got to Russia and was going crazy because my husband was working insane hours, he had actually he didn't speak Russian either. He had two full-time translators because of the amount of hours that he was working in the time. And they were exhausted by the end of the day because he, all he did was talk, and then they'd have to. And so,
that's hard work translating.
Right. And so I needed to work. I could not, I was isolated.
Right.
I had no friends, obviously. And I needed to, and I was used to working. And so I needed to. So I started looking at jobs in casinos in Moscow, thinking, well, maybe I can be a consultant and come in and help them with the things that I did. And there was a great deal of interest in Moscow when I started emailing, because when do they ever get a Las Vegas expert, in Russia?
Oh yeah, of course, in Rostov-on-Don.
That's right. So I was actually going to go to Moscow because I saw what the casinos were like in Rostov-on-Don. They were like video arcades. They were a little rinky-dink kind of. And I thought, if I'm going to do this, let me go. And I also assumed that the Russian casinos would have more money to pay me. So when I discussed this with my husband, he's like, "What are you, crazy? We just got married. You can't go to Moscow. I mean, you need to say," he said, "come work for me." But and I was kind of hesitant. So he talked to the owner of the company and said, "Listen, do you know anybody in the gaming industry, here that possibly would want to hire my wife?" And so I ended up meeting up with a friend of the owner, which this doesn't bode well for the situation. But when he contacted me, and he did speak English, and he said, "I'm going to pick you up at your apartment, and I'm going to take you around and show you not only my properties, but other properties here." So I said, "Great." And we were living in a building, and my neighbors were very friendly, and also very curious. Mm-hmm. So I was always feeding the stray dogs. There's a terrible stray dog problem, and I had taken my dog over there. So in order for us to walk out of the building without the stray dogs that was their territory, without having them attack her, which they did regularly, tried to, I would feed them, and developed kind of a friendship with these stray dogs. And so then I could walk peacefully out, in and out of my dog, could as well. So the neighbors were curious about me, because here I am, this crazy American who's feeding these dogs and these stray dogs.
Russians don't take care of stray dogs. Star City had a really big stray dog problem. The whole country does.
Right.
And every once in a while they go out and they kind of take care of the stray dogs, and then there's no stray dogs for a while, and then a year later they're back. Yeah.
They round them up and shoot them, and they also don't spay and neuter. If they stayed I understand. They also many Russians will also turn out. They'll buy an expensive pedigreed dog, and when it gets to be too much or whatever, they'll turn the dog loose and
just let it go. Yeah.
And say that this is what the dog wants to do. And I'm thinking to myself, that dog does not. The dog wants to, food and shelter and all those things, and to be loved. I mean, so my neighbors were friendly-ish. And we didn't really communicate, but they'd say, I think Sabaka is dog. Is that right?
It is. Yeah.
So Sabaka, and I'd say yes, and da. And so when I walked out, and the casino owner was waiting for me, they wouldn't make eye contact. Normally they would, and they wouldn't look at me, and they were looking down, and they would not make eye contact. So I thought, that is so weird. I wonder if they think I'm cheating on my husband with this guy, So I got in his car, and we're driving down these streets, and babushkas, older
grandmothers, right?
Yes, would shake their fists at him as he drove by. And I'm like, what is going? I've never seen that either. And so I said, why are those babushkas shaking their fists at you? Why are they angry at you? And it was like three on different streets that we were driving to. And he said, I don't know. They must be crazy. So I'm thinking, I don't know. And so when we actually arrived at a competitor's casino, he could not find parking. And this was on a street called Pushkinskaya, which every Russian city has a street named after Pushkin.
Right.
So we were on Pushkinskaya, and it was a very beautiful street in a crumbling sort of city. So it was it was a thoroughfare that was a tribute to Pushkin, which they, you can say anything to someone from Russia. You can say anything, and they have very thick skin, but do not ever say anything bad about
Pushkin. Right.
Which, he was kind of crazy himself, but, anyway, so he couldn't find parking. So he was looking, and then he started swearing and kind of punching the steering wheel. And I just met him, and I'm like, come on, calm down. And then he jerked his car up onto the sidewalk in front of a pharmacy and bumped a pedestrian. Bumped him. And then he turns, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm like, oh my God. And he turned to me and he said, okay, we're here. So so he knocked, the person was still on the ground when he said that, almost under the front of his car. I mean, he hadn't run him over, but he
bumped into him. Yeah.
Right. And the guy's getting up and brushing off his clothes, and he's getting ready to, and I'm standing there, are you okay? And of course he's looking at me like I don't even know what she's saying. And then he's brushing, and he's angry.
That's not what you should, anyway.
And he's in pain.
Yeah.
And he looks and he sees
the man,
casino guy, and he limped off. I mean, he didn't say a word. He was getting ready to say something.
Right.
He saw who it was. So then I'm like, okay. So we get to this casino. Yeah, it's called, or was at the time, Golden Jack. So we get to Golden Jack, and the staff is acting very, they were nervous that we were there. We sat outside on a patio, and I could tell they were very nervous. And he said, this is, and it was honestly the nicest casino that I had seen. And it was in Russian McDonald. And so he said, I said, people seem very nervous. And he said, well, it's because the owner was shot. And I said, shot? And it's all now I'm putting it all together in real time. And I said, shot? And he said, yes. And she thinks it was me. And I said, she thinks you shot her? And he said, yes, but she should know better. And I said, like an idiot, because I already knew the answer. I said, why? And he said, because if I shot her, she'd be dead. So now I'm sitting there and I'm looking around, and he's introducing me to her staff. Then we walk around inside, and they're very, very, and bodyguard or security guards were following us everywhere. And he's introducing me to management as this Las Vegas expert. So he's saying to them, and they're looking at me, and I'm thinking, my God, I mean, like now there's probably going to be a hit out on me because I'm the expert that's going to transform his business,
and undercut the Golden Jack. Yeah.
That's it, at the Golden Jack, ruin his competitors. So I am walking around, and then he says, okay, let's go see another one. And by then I want to get away from this guy. So he took me to 2 or 3, and he would pick my brain, like, what would you do? And I was giving him very basic casino information, such as you don't put restaurants right in the front. You make people walk through the casino.
Right.
You make them wait. You give them cheap food. They weren't
no
even
clocks.
They weren't even giving free drinks at that time. And the servers' uniforms, they kind of looked like, they were buttoned up and very formal. And I said, I'm from Vegas, sex sells.
More Hooters than New York, right?
That's right. That's it. So these women, and drinks need to be free. And he was very confused. Give drinks away? I said, yeah. Because then they'll keep gambling.
Right.
So basic stuff. But he was picking my brain. He acted like I was giving him the secret to the universe or something. So
I could have done that. I could have given. I don't even gamble. I don't think I've ever put a quarter in a slot machine, but I could have told him that.
I know. Some pretty basic stuff. So, and then finally, I got him to take me home, and he said,
"That sounds kind of funny."
I know. Take me home to my home.
Right. Exactly.
So I said to him, he said, we'll do dinner next week. We'll do dinner. It was not him asking. He was telling me, we will do dinner next week at my place, which was one of the properties that he owned. And he said, bring your husband. And so I go in and tell my husband, oh my, the owner of your company just fixed me up with what is definitely Russian mob, maybe light, but definitely baby village Russian mob. And my husband thought it would be really fun to, how much, and I'm like, oh no, it's not fun. No, we're talking shooting and all that stuff. But so that was kind of my experience. And we did end up having dinner with him. And we did end up seeing a gun that was strapped to his ankle, and then it, all bets were off at that point. We were done. And
you didn't work for him.
Oh no, no. And I'm not sure that he wanted to pay me. Right. I think what he wanted to do was do things like dinners. And then at that dinner, and he was married, by the way, he was married, but he said his wife was having issues and was in a sanatorium. It's not sanitarium, it's sanatorium.
Right.
And so when the dinner that we had, he brought,
meaning like a health spa.
Kind of, with medical benefits. So I say a Russian sanatorium is a place women go to get massaged while having a nervous breakdown. That's what.
Well, there was one in Sergeyev Posad where they sent us before launch. It was like I don't know. It was this weird. It was a hotel with a sauna and restaurants. Yes. It was like you go rest up for a week. It was boring for me. I was there by myself. I didn't have much to do, but they're really into that kind of thing.
Oh, very much. And so he, his wife was not around. She was having mental issues, he said, and it was at a sanatorium.
Married to him, I can understand why.
Yeah, no kidding. And but there was a younger woman in one of the casinos that he was flirting with very openly. And when he came to dinner, when we went to dinner at one of his properties, she was there. Mm-hmm. And her job, I believe, was she was beautiful and very young, was to distract my husband so the casino guy could pick my brain for free.
Right.
And it was, it seemed very clear that they had already decided how that was going to be handled. And so that was the experience. I went to Harvard Business School. One of my classmates was Russian, and great, really good guy. He came to my launch. He's a good friend, but he told me about his dad, who was in the KGB before, back in the Soviet Union. And he would tell funny stories. Now he's a pensioner, but he was in recruitment. Mm-hmm. And he said they had, there was three ways. There was ideology. There was like economic problems, like gambling debts is a way that they could get you to come on board. Mm-hmm. or sex. Yeah, right.
Women. So I always joked with him. I'm like, your dad was in HR.
Yeah, exactly.
He was in KGB HR. But anyway, they're very good at that.
Very
at recruiting and that.
Well, and men are at least 15 years ago in a village type environment. Men are on a pedestal. And the most important thing a woman can do is to be married, to have a husband. And Russian women are amazing. They're incredible and strong, and they are the main breadwinners most of the time. So you see these amazing women with these kind of schlubby guys, and they're so thrilled. And I'm thinking, why? You're amazing. He's drinks a lot and stays at home and yells at you and makes you, tells you things about your appearance that aren't true. And why would you even want to be with someone that is, pushed into their brains from the very beginning? It's all about men. So, she was very comfortable, the casino guy's girlfriend. She was very comfortable flirting, and there were a lot of women at the company that we worked for who were very openly flirtatious with my husband, and there was this kind of almost a baby talk tone that it was almost universal, and they would start kind of shoo, 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 and talking this kind of baby talk to Neil and I, which it was very clear. But again, I don't even know that it's so much that they thought he was fabulous, but it was kind of that men are revered. And
well, it also may have been he's the boss, and to have that connection will help their HR department. will help the FSB's HR department.
Exactly.
That's a possibility. I don't know, but
right.
So the KGB, everybody knows that. And then when Russia became Russia, that turned into the FSB, which is like that's like the FBI sort of, and the SVR is like the CIA. So they have the Russian service, which is FSB, and then the overseas service,
Right.
which is SVR. Yeah.
Right. Yes.
So did you get briefed on that? Like, did you learn? You just had to learn on your own. Like when you go with the U.S. government, you get briefings on security and that kind of thing. You didn't have any of that. You didn't have that.
No. You know, and when we went to Saudi, even though we weren't working for the government, I wasn't working, but my husband was not working for the government.
Right.
We got a packet, 200 pages of this is what you need to understand. This is, know, Russia, I suppose working for a Russian company and having, and they did bring expats over. In fact, my husband, when he came in, part of the deal was he got to bring in a dream team. So in other words, the goal was 5 years later, take the company public. Everybody gets a big payoff who helped with this retail model that they were implementing company-wide. I mean, this was a huge company. So, but nobody, we were just kind of thrown in there. And that was part of what I ended up doing when I worked for the company, was helping those that my husband was able to recruit, people he'd worked with before, or came highly recommended for various positions like CFO and CTO and those chief marketing officer, and all of those positions, a guy that runs the factories. There were factories. And so my job was basically to make that transition be the exact opposite of what it was like for us, because we were just kind of thrown into this situation, sink or swim on your own, and deal with it. So I did you
created that stuff, right?
I created that for them, so that because the goal was to make sure that they were happy and to keep them there for 5 years. And
for 5 years, did they stay?
One by one, because the owner of the company was kind of crazy. I mean, he was a madman. And
a Russian guy.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He's the one that threw the laptop through the second-story conference room window when he got mad. And that was just the beginning. I mean, he would physically assault employees. He never did any of those things in front of me or in front of Neil, my husband, but he did those things. And everybody spoke very openly about it. He didn't. And in fact, if reading articles that I've read about him since, he talks about that. He talks about his temper and all those things. So, but one by one, he had he wanted Neil to do what he was doing, but he could not. This was his baby. And the owner had been in the gulag for selling things on the black market, I think before Perestroika. So he was in the gulag, and that allegedly was what changed him. So the
gulag out in
Siberia.
So I went there. I visited another classmate from Harvard, was running a gold mine 1,000 miles northeast of Siberia. And you have to fly to Magadan. And if you tell, my Russian crewmate from space was at my house a couple of weeks ago. And whenever you tell a Russian that you went to Magadan, they're like, they laugh or they get shocked, or because that's where Stalin sent. They have a big giant memorial to the victims of the gulag, and Putin is trying to undo all that. He's trying to whitewash Stalin's legacy. There's a movement in Russia to rename Volgograd Stalingrad. It became Volgograd. Stalin was like one of the most evil men in human history. He was horrendous. And a lot of the Russians, when they look at World War II, they're like, we sacrificed so much. We fought so much against the Nazis. And yes, but a lot of that was Stalin doing it to themselves. Like, that's right. Hitler's not the only one that killed lots of Russians. It was themselves killing lots of Russians and Stalin. Anyway.
Right. Exactly. No, I agree. So one by one, they would end up leaving because the owner had a hard time stepping away. And that made it really hard on Neil, because then he would have to try and find someone to replace, and he would bring them over and he would sit them down and say, look, here's what's going to happen. This is what it's like. And I think for the most part, people thought they could handle it.
Right.
until they were in it.
Until they get there.
And
Yeah.
that's exactly right. And I made sure that their housing was great. I made sure that that everybody had a driver, and I made sure all of that was taken care of, and the stuff that, so they wouldn't have to think about all those little things that they wouldn't have to. I would handle all that.
Let's talk about that, because when you talk about housing, and I just assume you have a driver, I assume you have a translator, I assume all these things, because I lived in Russia. But if you live in America, you don't have any of those things that you have when you're in Russia.
Right.
So you have a driver.
Yeah.
You could drive, but it's dangerous. Remember when the meteor came down in Chelyabinsk, and there was all these videos, this meteor,
yes.
in 2013, I think it was a couple years ago. And there was all these videos, and I was like, why are there so many videos? Because every Russian has a ring in their car,
Correct.
because of all the insurance fraud, and
Right.
everybody, they have to video things to prove who did what because of insurance fraud. I mean, there's an entire nation with car cameras because there's so much insurance fraud and just basic theft going on.
Oh, absolutely. And I was in charge of all the drivers. That was one department that I managed. And so the head of the drivers, who didn't really want to work for me, there was so much resistance within the company with people of a certain age. If millennials or younger were really excited about.
They're so different. Young Russians are so different.
So different.
Yeah, they are.
And so, but the older Russians there was incredible mistrust and resistance like I've never seen in my life. I mean, it was an impressive amount of resistance
To having you be their boss?
Well, of anything that anybody that Neil brought in, or anything I did, anyone who came into the company who was not Russian, right, and had not been there before, was going to be met with the greatest amount of resistance possible. And they were very, very good at that sort of thing. So they do not like change. The older Russians did not want change, felt that their way was the best way. And we were crazy. And what's wrong with how we've always done things? Right. So the head of the drivers, did not want to report to me. And so we had to reach an understanding. And I had said to him, I got a call from one of the, this was an Irish guy who was the CFO. He said, I just saw my driver with a gun. He was in the trunk and he pulled out a gun. And I go, a gun? And he said, yes. And so I said, all right, let me get to I said, okay, it's got to be a toy or something. So I call the
guns are illegal in Russia. You can't have a gun.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. So I call the head of the drivers up, and we do this communication through like a translate program, because I would have to grab an available I didn't have my own. I'd have to grab an available, and they had a whole translation department. So I would grab an available translator if I could. If not, I'd use a translation tool. And so I said, we're typing back and forth. Is there a gun? Yes, there's do one of your drivers have guns? And he said, pistolettos.
Right.
We all carry them. Russian mob steals our car. So
of course, right. Have you met our competitors?
Right. So pistolettos, he said, we all the drivers carry the pistolettos.
The word for machine gun is automat, which sounds like the bank, like ATM. It's the same word. So you have to make sure you're talking about the ATM or the machine gun, the Kalashnikov. Anyway.
Right. So yes, I had to then go back to this really nice man and tell him they all carry those. Right. Because it's to prevent Russian mob from stealing their cars. Right. Because here's the other thing about it. The drivers, even though the company owned the car, if there was an accident, the driver, who was earning about $200 a month, by the way, driving, would be responsible to repairing, or if the car got stolen, the driver that earned nothing would be responsible for the cost of that car. And believe me, these were not like fancy cars. They were Toyota Camrys. So But still, that person could never repay that debt on the salary they were making.
There's so many structural just disaster problems. Did you, your story is amazing, and I can totally understand it, even though my experience in Russia is different, but I still know everything that you're saying.
I think you got the Lux treatment in Russia.
If you're going to do it, that's the way to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
But I love, like, I would go to friends' apartments for dinner and so on. By the way, did you live in an apartment, or did you have, yeah. So when you say house, everybody lives in an apartment.
Correct.
Yeah.
But
there's nice apartments. Most of them are not nice, and they're kind of smelly, and they smell like the 70s.
Right. Or cabbage. I mean, that was
cabbage.
Yes.
Kapusta.
Maybe the 70s in Russia were all about the cooked cabbage, but yeah, we lived in a newer building. We lived on Pushkinskaya.
Right. Oh, wow.
Yeah. Which was the nicest street. It was supposed to be at that time, the nicest building. And it was fine. I'm sure that it was more than fine.
Yeah.
It was nice, but it wasn't anything like, it was about at the same level as the first apartment I had when I graduated from college and moved into an apartment on my own. So it was, it had the basics.
Right. It was nice, but it wasn't luxury.
And that was fine. And it also had a building manager who was going through our, when I would leave.
Tell us that story. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I knew just a few Russian words, and I already told you svinya, swine, but skolka is how much.
How many? Yeah.
Yeah. So I would be going out to buy things, and normally they weren't marked. The prices weren't marked. So you had to be able to ask, unfortunately.
Where did you shop? Like at the Ashan or at the Dixie, or
at the open? Sometimes at the open market.
Oh, Rinka. Yeah.
And then at just regular grocery, like a normal grocery store, but the prices weren't marked on many things. And I needed to know. So I would say skolka, and I would hand the clerk the notepad and pen to write down the ruble amount.
Right.
So then I would know, and I'm really good at converting rubles to dollars in my head. And I would know, okay, that's a fair price or whatever. And so I always went everywhere with my notebook so that I would be prepared if there were no prices on items. So I left and was going to the grocery store and forgot my notepad. And so I walked out, and there was a building manager who sat, kind of a concierge or doorman sort of thing, who sat right as you exited. So she saw me exit. And so I, got 100 yards away. Oh, forgot, turned around, doubled back, rode the elevator up to my floor, walked in the door, and she was in our bedroom with the drawers open, going through the drawers. And she was startled, of course. And I said, what are you doing? And she was yelling at me in Russian, and I didn't know what she was saying. So I called one of Neil's translators and she, said, what is she saying to me? What is she saying? And the translator said, oh, she's telling you that it's a routine apartment inspection. So yeah, you just happened to be in my drawers in the bedroom.
Going through your underwear drawer 1 minute after you left.
Correct. Yeah.
So every Russian would just nod. Yep. Of course, that's what's happening. Like, they would just know that this is what's happening. And in America, this would never happen unless it's in some kind of, unless it's in like a TV show about some criminal drama or something, right? Like, this would never happen here, and it's completely expected there. Yeah,
that's right. And nothing shocks them.
Because you're American. I don't think they don't go through each other's stuff. I think, that would never.
I don't think so either. But I think there was a huge curiosity because it hadn't really been around Americans. And I think I don't believe that she was stealing.
Yeah.
I believe it was her curiosity. She wanted to know, what do American, t-shirts, what do they have? Because why would you be in our dressers looking at
you don't think she had a boss telling her to go look for stuff?
I don't think so. I think maybe, perhaps, who knows?
Yeah.
But we never had anything stolen. We never
Right.
had any items stolen or anything taken from our apartment.
Yeah.
But
I think Russia doesn't, I always felt safe in that sense. If you get on the wrong side of Putin, you're going to get dizzy and fall off a building.
right,
If you get on the wrong side of your competitor in the casino business,
might get shot.
those things are very dangerous.
Very.
But the average Russian is not stealing stuff. They're very
I would have trusted. I would have trusted our driver, our translators, that our housekeeper.
There's no need to lock your door because your neighbors aren't going to steal anything, and the FSB can get in anyway. So there's no need to lock the door.
Right, and so I wasn't. I had trust I trusted many people with my life that I met over there. But then there were others that I think would, for example, I used to say, Russians are survivors, and
absolutely, that's the key.
What has happened in that country for forever, the struggles and the suffering, and they are survivors. Mm-hmm. And so I had a very close group of friends when I ended up leaving, and then there were my sort of work friends that I thought were friendly,
right?
But those people, if we were starving, they would, if all of a sudden there was a famine, and these friendly people, not my close circle of friends, but these friendly Russians, they would toast me and tell me how wonderful I was, and then they would eat me. I mean,
But your close friends were.
I trust with my life. Yeah.
They say there's to have a really good true Russian friend there's probably the best friend you could ever have.
Right.
A lot of Americans think how cold Russians are, and they're scowling and stuff. Well, when they look at us, they see that we're frivolous and we smile and everybody's our friend, and like they don't trust you because in the Soviet days, there was nothing to smile about. So if you were smiling, either you were crazy there's a cultural problem with smiling that they really don't trust. But once you got to know them, for example, my crewmate, when we took our crew photos, I was commander and I was like, all right, everybody looks serious. And we took a picture, and everybody smiled. And we took a picture, and everybody is smiling except for he's like this.
Of course.
But he's not smiling, but he's the best guy. He's the best friend you could ever want. And he laughs and whatever, but in public, it's very stoic and strict because that's the Soviet way. You're not supposed to be frivolous and laughing and stuff. But I think young people are attracted to that happiness and joy that you can find in the West in a way that older people in Russia were very distrustful of, I guess.
Right. In fact, you're absolutely right. If I happened to be walking with a translator and I was obviously speaking English, and a younger person heard me speaking English, they were drawn to me, and they'd say, they'd say something to me in English just walking down the street.
Right.
So yes, and the phone. We had a landline at that point, along with our cells. And so if I answered the phone and just said hello, they knew then the wrong number. They knew I was American or whatever. Right. And then the calls would start, and they would want to have conversations, and then they'd share it with their friends. So I had to start answering the phone as the Russians do, as allo. And then da or niet. So I would just say, and then I'd hang up or whatever, like what I said. But I would have it was crazy the amount of phone, because they would share, and I could tell they were younger. How are you? What did they say? Rambo or something.
Right. Whatever that's
funny. Whatever movie they were. Rambo was always popular. I don't know. So.
There's a TV show you might enjoy it. Well, it's all in Russian, so you might not enjoy it, but it's called Как я стал русским, How I Became Russian. And it's about an American New York Times, but the New York Post, whatever, they made up a fake name.
Wow. No, I love that.
He ends up in Moscow,
Mhm.
It's like these adventures of this American, and it's all the stereotypical Russian tropes. There's an oligarch, and there's
Okay.
the beautiful woman secretary who's trying to,
Right.
anyway, and there's the driver who's every possible. And it's funny because they make fun of themselves. They know all these stereotypes. They would laugh
Right.
at all these things. And
Yes.
it's a really, really well done comedy series. If you can find out some way to translate it or something, I think a
Oh,
lot
there's no subtitles.
in Russian, or I don't know. I when I was at NASA, I used it as a like for my English or Russian language training. Like we'd watch this show and I would use it to try and translate.
Okay. Yeah,
But
I wonder if I can get it with subtitles. I'd love to watch it.
you would enjoy it. It's how I became Russian.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. It's like when even speaking English in restaurant, this just came to me and I don't know what triggered it, but going to McDonald's, there was a
Mhm.
McDonald's and it was a big deal. And when I would go in ordering, I would think, well, certainly nobody will recognize that, I can say Big Mac
Right.
and it'll be fine. And so I would go in and is two vu? Is the number two vu?
There's 21 different ways to say every number. It's dva.
Okay.
Adin, dva, three. So dva or dvu.
The vu.
You can say dvu, dvu.
Maybe that was, yeah. Maybe I heard it when my translator was telling me vu. So I would go in and I would hold, I go, vu, Big Mac, Biz Luca, no onions.
No onions. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say that and they wouldn't understand. And then I'd go out and I'd get the translators wait in the car. I'd go, come in. And I go, is Big Mac Big Mac? She goes, yeah, Big Mac. And so I'd go up there and she would tell them in Russian and I would hear her say Big Mac. And so then I thought, I have to say this with a Russian accent. And so I would say, Vu, Big Mac, Biz Luca. And they'd be like, oh, sure. And I had to use a Russian accent to say Big Mac. And so my American or whatever it is, West Coast probably,
Melanie, I went to the embassy to do Russian language training. And so I'm like, I speak okay Russian, not great. And there's a Burger King right next to the embassy.
Yes.
So I went down one day and the people who work there they're not Russian, they're Uzbeki, like the workers. And at Burger King, they have Whoppers. And I went, Adin Whopper, пожалуйста. One Whopper, please. And the guy was like, huh? Adin Whopper, пожалуйста. Huh? And finally, the embassy person went, Adin Whopper, пожалуйста. And he was like, Whopper. I'm like, it's Burger King. You have Whopper or Gumburger. Anyway, I had these exact same thing.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about, so every country has immigrants, right? And I'm in Texas. There's a lot of Mexican and Central American people here. In Russia is no different. And there was absolutely a racist tendency. We had some Asian astronauts who got beat up on the metro and it was not good. Maybe like 15 or 20 years ago. I think that's gotten better today. But like the Central Asian people from Uzbekistan or Tajikistan, there's Chechens, who are very different. There's these different groups that are treated very differently and they're very much looked down on. And by the way, they're doing all the fighting. When you see the Russian soldiers there are some Russians, but a lot of them are Chechens. A lot of the atrocities in Bucha were committed by Chechens. A lot of this guy they just put on trial in Ukraine was from the Far East, Anyway, so my point is it's not like Russia is all people that look like you and me.
Correct.
And also in America, and I don't understand this, they call us Caucasian. In Russia, if you're Caucasian, you don't look like us.
Right.
That's the brown people are Caucasian. So, I want to know your experience in Rostov-on-Don. Was everybody there ethnic Russian or was it a mix like I'm talking about?
Well, it was a fairly, and again, I don't really know the breakdown. I know there was a huge Ukrainian population
Yeah.
in Rostov
Well,
on
it's right. You're right there, right?
right, with the proximity. And I had several friends who were Georgian, and they have no trust of Russians because of what, and rightfully so,
Because of
what happened in Georgia.
Yeah, Putin destroyed Georgia.
Correct.
And annexed part of Georgia.
That is exactly right. So there was
we didn't know about it because it wasn't in Europe. It just kind of happened and we ignored it.
Right. And so there is and I really enjoyed, one of my neighbors was Georgian, and she was just lovely. I did a Thanksgiving dinner there and invited a lot of Russians and everyone that worked for the company that Neil had brought over, and she and my Georgian friends too, and she was just wonderful, but had no trust whatsoever. Her father had lost everything.
Yeah.
When that happened, and they, he was fairly wealthy, and it was just the way it was, and there was no recourse, and their lives were destroyed.
Yeah.
So I will tell you that I did not see a lot of Black people in fact, I can't think of any. There was one Black person in all of Rostov-on-Don.
Right.
And she worked at at a hotel at the front desk, and that's how I happened to see her. And I mean, just to be very very blunt, there was a lot of racism.
Oh my God!
Yeah, just horrific.
Yeah.
And the N-word was very popular in Rostov-on-Don. And I said to one of the translators, I said, I can't imagine how difficult it is she was probably in her early 20s, how difficult it growing up here must have been if she grew up here. And the translator, who had also grown up in Rostov-on-Don, said, oh yes, she grew up here. Her mother went away to college.
Right.
And I don't know where she went, but met her father, the girl's father, and got pregnant, and then came back to Rostov-on-Don to have the baby, and the baby was raised there. And I can't even imagine. I said to the translator, how I mean, they must have treated her just horribly. And she said there was incredible cruelty toward her, toward this poor girl.
That culture does not, they just can't understand or grasp having someone. There's also not a lot of in Russia, there's a lot of Asian background people, Central Asian, but there's almost the Soviet Union had a lot of, obviously, not colonies, but whatever, partner states in Africa. So there was a lot of educational interchange back in the 70s and 80s. The Africans would go to school in Russia, but then they didn't usually stay because that culture just does not handle that. Also Hispanic, like South American, Central American, there was Cuba was obviously a big part of it, but there was also very little Hispanics that I saw in Russia. I went to this in St. Petersburg. I went to a Cuban place and got a mojito, and I spoke, I know a few words of Spanish. I spoke some Spanish. It was the happiest human I've ever seen in my life to have somebody who knew how to say "Buenos dias, gracias, señor." That was because that, again, in Russia, they don't.
No,
they just don't have that. Yeah.
Yeah. It would be a very difficult place, I believe, even today, for
if you were African or South American or something.
Right.
So how about food?
What about? Oh, well,
did you like it? Is there anything you liked? Was there anything gross? Was there? Yeah.
I mean, this is going to sound really terrible, but you could buy caviar at the grocery store. And so I would buy, and it was very inexpensive compared to here. And I happen to like it. And I know it's, there's a lot of controversy with caviar but yeah, I would, I would enjoy a lot of, I ate a lot of caviar while I was there. The restaurants were, There were a couple of really good restaurants, and just a few. There were lots of restaurants, but there were a few at that time. One was an Italian restaurant and they brought an Italian chef over. Wow. And but as far as the actual food that Russian food, I wasn't much of a fan, but I just didn't get a good version of the dishes that I experienced. So
there's a lot of Russian food I love. I like borscht. They do great mashed potatoes, Kiev chicken, chicken cordon bleu, Kievsky chicken was really good. And they had like Tatar bulbas, I think it was a Ukrainian restaurant in Moscow that was great. I don't know. I really enjoyed the food. In space, we didn't have any fish, and the Russians had tons of fish.
Oh, sure.
So we would trade, the stuff that we really didn't like, they loved, and the stuff that we didn't get enough of, they had. So it was a really good system. I enjoyed the vast majority of the Russian food I had, but it's not common. Like in the West, people they know borscht, I guess, and I don't know what else. Salat Olivier, the New Year's salad. I don't know if you ever had that.
I did, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they did. They do a lot of grilling. They have
shashlik.
And that, shashlik.
Did the drivers do that? For our NASA drivers were great. The drivers on Fridays would always have shashlik, which is like barbecue skewered meat. It's really good. Yeah.
And vegetables too. They
and
grill
vegetables,
the vegetables. Yeah. And I love that. I thought that was good. I had good food in Moscow. There were wonderful restaurants. Russian McDonald was not, and again, this was 15 years ago.
Right.
I've been told that it's gotten much better.
Yeah.
It was hard. And they never had menus in English. So I would go around to the few restaurants that say there were people coming in to be for interviews or whatever for positions. You would take them to dinner, executives, you would take them to dinner, and then they couldn't read the menu. So I would go around to the restaurants and say, may I have a menu? I'm going to have it translated.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So then we come in with the English menus so that everyone could order or whatever. And we didn't then have to ask. See, I always felt guilty asking translators or our driver to work beyond a normal period of time. And they were willing to, but it was also, why should they have to be dragged along to sit through a boring dinner just because we can't read the menu? That is our problem. That's certainly not theirs. And why should our driver have to sit outside when he has a young daughter at home, and we'll figure out a way to get back to our apartment. You guys.
Nah, Melanie, that's not that young daughter at home is getting fed because he's able to have this job.
Yeah, that's true.
And if he left, there's a lot of other guys that would be happy to have that job too.
Well, and honestly, he was our driver. He is wonderful. He was low man on the totem pole in the driver pool, but he had driven for us when we visited before we ended up moving there, and Neil liked him, and so he said, I want that guy. And then what happened is, and honestly, he was making $200 a month.
Right.
Neil tripled his salary.
Right.
And so like his life changed overnight.
And 15 years ago, that was life-changing money. And you know what? There's no more McDonald's.
I know.
There's no more American whatever companies, and that's what really frustrates me, because I know lots and lots and lots of great Russians that don't want all this bullshit that's happening in Ukraine. They want a good job, and they want a wife and kids, and they want, they just want normal things that we all want.
Right.
And there's this, and of course they can't speak out. They could speak out and go to jail, and what good would that do anybody? Right. So
no good. And if jails are like hospitals, their hospitals were a nightmare when I was there. Can't even imagine what the prison system is like.
Yeah. Well, a lot of Russians, they don't go to hospitals because that you go there to die. Like when you go to the hospital is when you get sick.
And in the ones that I visited, you had to bring your own sheets for the bed.
Mhm.
I
Yep.
mean, and
And you
food.
have to bring vzятki. You have to pay bribes. You have to
Oh yeah.
pay.
And bribe is used in Russia like people use tip. Oh, I'm going to tip the valet
It's a
park.
tip. That's
It's a
right.
tip. That's
It,
right.
um, it's not, it shouldn't be. It's again, it's a culture of corruption.
Yeah, you bribe doctors for care. I mean, you're right. It's insane.
And that came about during the Soviet years when there weren't things. The joke was, in the Soviet years, everybody had money, but there was nothing to buy.
Right.
And then in the 90s, nobody had money, but there was everything to buy.
Right.
And Putin stabilized that.
Mhm.
The 2000, like things in the 2000s really got better for most Russians. Pensioners started getting their pension paycheck, and
Right.
he stabilized the economy, which is why, to some extent, a lot of Russians
Support him.
but I think a lot less support him than do we. In the West, we'll see 70% say they support. Well, when the guy asking questions for the poll comes around, you're not going to trust him. And
Right.
if you say, I don't support it, then you might end up in jail. And so people say things just like when Trump got elected, everybody told the pollsters they weren't going to vote because they were embarrassed to say they'd vote for Trump. And then all of a sudden he won and it shocked everybody.
Right.
Well, it's like that times 100 in Russia.
Right.
Because
Exactly.
here you're not going to jail, but there you are. But anyway.
Right. Exactly.
Well, so this cultural background in Russia is fascinating. It's not living the downtown Moscow glamorous life that you
Not
did.
at all. No.
Have you been back?
No. And I assume eventually I'll want to do that. It's a very I have like the essay was titled mixed feelings. I have mixed feelings.
Right.
Do I think that my husband would have cancer would have happened? Yes, I do. I don't think Russia caused my husband to have cancer.
Right.
But do I think that experience and the stress and the amount of how difficult it was day in and day out, or climbing 11 flights of stairs for 2 months waiting for an elevator park, the heat out in our apartment, we could see our breath indoors for months. It was so cold.
Right.
So, and then working the kind of hours he had to work, and then dealing with an owner.
And you were alone.
I was alone. Yeah, I was alone. And then learning that our apartment was bugged by the owner of the company, because he repeated back to me the terrible things that I said to him. So I have mixed feelings about Russia. I really do. But I think I probably should go back at least once, one more time in my life.
For healing. Yeah.
Just to kind of, to be able to look at it, hopefully through with eyes that see the good times that we had. And we did have a lot of good times, and we laughed all the time because it was so ridiculous.
It was so comical. Right.
That's it. What else was there to do? So.
I spent a year in Korea as an F-16 pilot, and we had this horrendous, disgusting apartment downtown because just for the type of assignment I was on anyway. Yeah. And there was no air conditioning. So we spent about a month in the summertime. I had a thermometer. The temperature inside the bedroom was over 90 degrees day and night. And you'd just be laying there dripping sweat. Yeah. And it was kind of comical. Eventually I was able to buy from somebody a wall unit air conditioner, and like all of a sudden it was 70 degrees, and it was the most wonderful thing of all time.
Right.
Those sometimes suffering like that is good for you.
It is.
And then I really appreciate America a lot based on.
Yes. The one thing that I was missing, and this is not specific to Russia, it's all of Europe, is we didn't have a clothes dryer. We didn't have something to dry our clothes. And then it was so humid right there on the Don River in the summertime that our clothes would never dry, and then they would mildew. So we were dealing with, and So I'm saying there has to be I know there are clothes dryers in Moscow. I know that. There has to be one in Rostov-on-Don.
Right.
And everybody's like, no, no, no. And finally, someone located a 5-year-old floor model of a dryer that had just was sitting there under an inch of dust in a show, shoved in the corner of an appliance showroom. And it was the happiest day of my life. I mean, who would have thought a clothes dryer, a dryer, could be a, time to something to celebrate? And it was a huge celebration. I was like so excited about that. Those little things that we take for granted, and the ease of life. And I know that everybody kind of thinks that, whatever you're going through, life is hard, but you really do understand what struggle is like when you are thrown into a situation like I was, or like you were in Korea.
Yeah. There's really, sometimes suffering is good so you can appreciate what you have. And then when you complain about things, I always joke, hashtag first world problems.
Exactly.
It just makes you more grateful.
It does. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. Were you happy to leave? I mean, was coming back to the States, I guess it was bittersweet based on.
I was very happy to leave. I will, no matter what, the circumstances, we were leaving once we discovered that our apartment was bugged. We had known that when we traveled to Moscow.
How did you discover that?
Because the owner of the company repeated back to me exactly the derogatory words I had said about him to my husband when it was just the two of us sitting at our kitchen table, and then and smiled smugly and didn't realize that I could put two and two together, I guess. Right. And then he did the same thing with my husband. He repeated back to him things my husband had said, derogatory things like he probably shouldn't slap employees, like that's crazy. And so he repeated that back to Neil. And Neil had wanted to stick it out because he was looking at, 5 years and he could retire, and
a good paycheck. Yeah.
Yeah. It was going to be a big amount when the company went public. And so he really wanted to stick it out. And so, but once we knew that our space was violated like that, our private space, because, Neil and I had kind of a debate over, should we find these and get rid of them? And my thought was, well, we know that they're in the kitchen. We know that because that anything that he's repeated to us, we said to each other in the kitchen. We've said horrible things about him in the living room, and he could repeat those, or in the bedroom or whatever. So we know where it is for sure.
Right.
So we just have to kind of think about what we're saying. And in the meantime, Neil had scheduled a couple of interviews in New York City, which is where he worked for most of his career. And we were headed back there, but he had sciatica. He thought it was sciatica that was flaring up, and turned out it was cancer. So, but I would have been happy to leave at any time in that 2-year period.
Right.
Just like, this can't really be happening. I mean, this is just so crazy.
Right. Sometimes it's like, I spent a year there 1 week.
Yes, exactly.
So in our astronaut quarters in Star City, we have these giant, gaudy, 3-story, beautiful American homes. In the middle, it's a Soviet base, like Soviet apartments, Soviet building. It's Rostov-on-Don.
Right.
Did you ever see Ironia Sudbi? It's the Russian New Year's movie.
No.
It's kind of like Christmas Story or Charlie Brown Christmas.
Right.
It's a Soviet movie from the 70s, and it's a New Year's. They were atheists, but it's a New Year's movie. And this guy goes to Sanduny, which is the Moscow Banya, and he gets drunk, which is Russian. That's like the funniest trope, is getting drunk. And so he ends up on a flight to Leningrad by accident, St. Petersburg. And he has a key, and he goes into the apartment number on the Ulitsa Pushkina on the whatever, and the key works, and he goes in, and everything's the same except for it's in Leningrad and not Moscow. And they're making fun of the Soviet system of everything is the same everywhere. They're just making fun of themselves, how it's the same thing everywhere. Anyway, it's one of those cultural things. And
you have to send me the names of these movies so I can look and see if I can find them with English titles.
they definitely have that. Yeah, you would enjoy it. It's like a romantic comedy. It's a cute, I don't know. I'll send it to you. The Irony of Fate.
Absolutely.
So I don't know how I got distracted, but in Star City, and my point was it's the same buildings everywhere.
Right.
So we have these beautiful, gaudy American things that they made for the astronauts so we could be comfortable while all the Russians live in standard 70s Russian apartments.
Right.
And we would be down there and sort of joking, but sort of not, talk to the walls. Like one time, we didn't have the right knee boards with pencils for the simulator. So we're in the Soyuz and we needed some equipment. And we were talking about the equipment we needed. And the next day, the equipment showed up.
Oh, 100% you were being 100. I mean, there's no question.
My friend, they had a pre-launch party and he said, oh, come to our party. So I went. It was like, I don't know, 30 or 40. It was a Russian party with cucumbers and vodka, toasting. Yeah. And the next day, who's now my neighbor, he was like our manager of the division. He's like, Flanders, they came and why'd you go to that party yesterday? Like somebody was watching.
Of course.
So I had those same, you're under nabludenia, you're under observation. I had that experience many times.
Absolutely. And this, I really believe, well, I knew it was the owner because of what, because he repeated it back to me. So I knew he was the one doing it. I doubted that it was the KGB or FSB or anybody else. I mean, it wasn't the Russian government. It was this guy. But when we would go to Moscow, because of, I don't know, because of Neil's position or whatever, but we would stay in when we stayed in a certain hotel, I always knew, because I could hear somebody moving behind the mirror that you couldn't lift off the wall. Then I could hear kind of like a whirling sound. And I'm thinking, must be hot in there. They probably got a fan going.
So you had a two-way mirror in your hotel in Moscow.
Yeah, and it's actually a hotel that was notorious for spying on American diplomats. Right. It's since been torn down, but we stayed in that hotel several times and had that. I knew it. I could hear what was going on. And
you could have fun with that.
Oh, I know, absolutely. You can have a great time with that. But yeah, and the other thing that was fascinating about, and part of me wondered, was the guy, our next door neighbor was head of the Cossacks, which is crazy to me.
Wow. So
yeah, our next door neighbor was head of the Cossacks. So I never met him or even really saw him because he was very secretive, and he'd move in and out of his apartment quietly. And I'd open my door to try and say, hello, I'm your neighbor. And he, hurry in and shut his door. And so part of me thought, maybe he's watching us. Maybe he's part of his job is to watch us, and to perhaps the recording device whatever he's using is connected in some way to our apartment or whatever, because you start to get paranoid, but you have legitimate reasons for
of course,
that sort of thing.
One of the things in 1984 has always fascinated me. When I was a kid, it really impacted me, the George Orwell book. And I read it when I was in Russia in training. I read it again. Wow. And the Russians are pretty good at surveillance, but there's a little bit of an element of ineptitude with them.
Yes.
But the Chinese are really good at that. They've created the most unbelievable Orwellian surveillance state. And that, I hate to get kind of political or whatever, but when you look at the future of humanity, man, there's a dark future that we need to make sure we don't go down. You lived in that to a certain extent. And imagine if it was perfect. Imagine if everywhere you went, there's facial recognition software, there's all kinds of biometrics, that everybody knows everything that you do and say, and to a certain extent think.
Sure. Yeah, that's so creepy.
It's so 2022, like it's here, and I think that's something we really need to focus on, because anyway.
Yeah, I have a conversation with someone about something, and then I get an ad on my phone when I'm scrolling on Instagram for that item.
It's listening.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. So I, and at first I was like, that can't, is that a coincidence?
It's not only China. Yeah, we have it here voluntarily.
Exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, the good old day. I miss Jason Bourne, where you could have a safe deposit box with some passports and you could go sneak around. You can't sneak around anymore.
No.
Like it's actually hurt spycraft, and because
Sure.
facial recognition, it's hard to sneak around anyway.
Right. Yeah, I love the Bourne movies too. Those are my favorite.
Back in the day. Yeah. Well, your story was really touching, Melanie. Sometimes life happens,
It does.
You end up in unexpected, and this is what you do for a living, right? With your columns, and you talk about relationships.
Right.
And
right.
So what advice can you share with us about that to kind of close on some positive thoughts?
You mean about relationships and getting back out there? Well, I think it was really difficult to go from a situation where people dated a certain way, and then several years later people began dating differently, which is through apps and all of that. And I see a lot of resistance for those who are newly single at a certain age, either they're widowed or divorced. But you have to, you really have to get out there. You have to say, yeah, this sort of way that we're all dating now is unnatural and crazy, and I'm afraid, and these are all strangers, but this is the way that it is.
It's the 21st century.
That's it.
I worry about young kids though, because they don't have the same, like when we grew up, we interacted with people, and a lot of young people are growing up on video games and TikTok, and they're not interacting with each other.
Right. And they're absolutely not. People are staring down at their phones, and this is the reality. And that I don't believe that that's only going to continue to grow and grow and grow as we become more and more and more attached to our phones. And I'm completely attached to mine. I love it. And hate it too at the same time. But I just think that for someone who has who had a really wonderful marriage, and I had a really great marriage. It was hard, but it's not, it's human nature to want to love and to be loved. And I think that people often, either through bad relationships or bad marriages or whatever, give up. And that's a shame, because have I met anyone? I've had, a few relationships since Neil died, but I'm still hopeful. Still hopeful. And I'm certainly not looking for someone that reminds me of him. That would be the worst thing, in fact.
Yeah. Right.
So, I'm, and I think that people need to be fearless and just get out there and do it.
Right. Okay. I just saw on Twitter, it was like Jimmy Kimmel, I think. Best, worst first dates or something. It was so funny. Right. Do you have any great stories? Not necessarily you, but some of these were just funny. Like this one lady had just taken some medicine that she was having a really rough time on our first date, and I think eventually married the guy. And there was some hilarious stuff on Twitter. So any funny dating stories?
Absolutely. And I chronicled a year of online dating when I finally got back out there. Neil had been gone as long as we had been together, which was 5 years. And I finally said, okay. And I had moved from Las Vegas because I'd come to New York. I said, I want to be a writer. I'm not afraid of anything anymore. The worst possible thing happened. I'm just going to sell my possessions, go to New York City and start writing and do this and go for it. So one of the professors that I had at the new school said, you need to write and write and write and write and write and build a following. So she suggested again that was 10 years ago, that I blog. And so I thought, well, what am I going to blog about? And I wanted to do a limited time. So I started having these crazy experiences, and believe me, they were insane. So I was telling my friends about it, and my friends were like, this is it, blog about this. So I chronicled a year of online dating. And so, yes, I had my very first date was with an antiques dealer, and very kind of mild-mannered guy.
Right.
He had Velcro shoes and things. I'm like, kind of nerdy, kind of.
Right.
And so we, everything is lovely. We have this nice meal, and we're saying goodbye. And I said, okay, I'm gonna, and he said, oh, no, I'll walk you home. I lived at that time on the Upper West Side. So he said, I'll walk you home. Oh, no, that's okay. And he said, no, I insist. And so I'm thinking, well, what a nice guy. He's a gentleman. Right. I mean, pretty safe neighborhood, but okay. Right. So he walks me home, and so I'm saying, it was very, thank you so much. It was really nice to meet you. He, I don't know what happened. He grabbed his hand around the back of my head, and and I wrote in the essay, an unusual strength for an antiques dealer, He just was like, I was pushing him away, and I'm just shocked. He says, oh, let's do this again soon. And I'm thinking, oh yeah, over my dead body. But that was my first experience. I mean, I had, and it just keeps, one time I had dated a guy for a few times, and he was such a nice man. But there wasn't that chemistry, that physical kind of like whatever. Yeah. And he was so nice, and he had moved from somewhere to, I think, Chicago to New York City because of his company. And he, on our third date, which I was getting ready to tell him, I don't think we should do this, because I felt guilty. He would insist on paying. And it just made me feel awful, because I knew I was not going to end up with this guy.
Right.
And I wanted to give it a shot, because I thought maybe it doesn't, instant.
Yeah, you never know.
That's right. He might grow on you. So he kept hinting that he was having hernia surgery, and he didn't have anyone to take him home from the hospital's day surgery. And he kept saying it. And finally I felt so awful that I said, I'll do it. So I'm going to the surgery is in 2 days. He okay, just a reminder. And all you have to do is, they'll release me to someone who, and then you can, take me back to my apartment again on the Upper West Side, and I'll be fine. So I get there, and they're calling, and I don't even know if I knew his last name, but they were saying that, the family of Mr.
Right.
I'm just sitting there, and finally I go, oh, that's me. So they said, yes, come on back. He's in recovery. So I walk back to the recovery, he's in surgical recovery or whatever it is. I walk back to this guy that I've been on 3 dates with, and his hospital gown was up around his waist. He was completely naked. Right? So I said, when I wrote about this, I said, so there was, Joe, and there were his testicles right there. So then
at least he still had them.
Yeah, that's true. It was not that kind of surgery. So then I had to dress him. The nurse is like, well, it's not like you haven't seen it before here, like we were
joking.
And I'm thinking, well, actually, the first time was 5 minutes ago when I walked in this room, but and so I'm bending down and I'm helping him. It's so intimate,
right?
Stranger. I'm helping him into his, underwear and clothes, and I'm thinking, this is so awful in every way. And so I definitely, we didn't see each other after that date. And I think he was humiliated too, because he was so out of it.
Right.
Got there. I don't think he realized, but I believe so those are the kind of dating experiences I had.
That's what when you're a dating columnist, that's what you need though.
100%. The good dates are boring.
Right.
Yeah. So
it depends on how good they are, I guess.
Right. Well, and in that year, I went on over 100 dates in that year. I really kind of considered, I considered it my job, because I wrote the word count equivalent of 2.5 books in that year. So
you should make a book called 100 First Dates.
I am really considering that. I
or
am definitely, or just a bunch of short stories,
yeah. That
that were
my
really,
book, I got my book here. The How to Astronaut is basically a bunch of short stories about space.
oh, I'm going to get that book.
Try it. It's great. I tried to write it in a fun way. It's not like space nerd.
Yeah.
You don't have to be a scientist or anything.
Oh, I'm definitely
I
going
loved
to
it. It was
check
fun.
that out. Yeah, I like reading short, and the way we read has changed.
Mm-hmm.
We read in shorter bits.
I do. Yeah. I'm reading Chesapeake right now, James Michener book.
Right.
I love Michener. Poland was great, but it's like it's War and Peace. It's 1,000 pages. And I'm just not a good reader. And it takes me from my daughter's an English major and she reads like a book a day. It's insane.
Right.
So anyway.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's finish with this. Any good book recommendations?
Well, because the subject is Russia, and most people don't know a lot about the day-to-day stuff that happens, I would recommend, and this was actually the first article that I ever published, and I published it in the Moscow Times, but Ian Fraser has an amazing book, a travelogue about his time in Russia. It's called Travels in Siberia. And it's funny. He's a writer. He's a writer for the New Yorker, 2-time Thurber Award winner for humor. So it's a very funny read, very accurate read. And because of the subject is Russia, I think that's an appropriate book to recommend.
It's apropos nowadays.
That's right.
Okay. I'm going to get that. There's a similar book. It's called Une année en Provence, A Year in Provence by Peter Mayle, a British guy. He wrote it back in the 90s, but it's got super popular. But he basically went and lived in southern France, and it's a humorous account of that. So
yeah, I love that.
I like those kind of books. Yeah.
I do too. Yes.
Okay.
All
Well,
right.
Melani, thank you so much. This is a long conversation. I appreciate your time, and you have amazing stories, and I know your story is very inspirational. People, life happens and it's not perfect for anybody, and your story is very inspirational. So I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you, Terry. Thank you for having me on.
It was
Really
fun.
appreciate it. It was fun.
Okay.
All right. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.